Welcome to Husband Talking. Explore riveting tales of infidelity with us. Please subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's begin.
I might be the first person in the history of messed-up marriages to actually send his wife's partner a thank you note. Honestly, I did. I'm almost never ill, but there was a very bad flu going around the office where I worked one Thursday morning, and I was showing the symptoms quite clearly. So, instead of spreading it to everyone, my boss sent me home. It was around noon, and I thought my wife Anna could take good care of me, make me the chicken soup I needed, check my temperature, and generally look after me before putting me to bed. When I pulled onto the street where I lived and approached my house, I noticed a red pickup truck parked in the driveway. I really didn't think anything of it at that particular moment. I couldn't think of anything except how awful I felt. The vehicle wasn't familiar, and since it was taking up space where my beat-up SUV normally sat, I parked by the curb. I went in through the garage, which opened into the kitchen. There was no sign of Anna in the kitchen or the front den. At that point, a queasy feeling unrelated to the flu began to build in my gut, especially when I approached the back of the house where our bedroom was located and began to hear the telltale sounds of sex. I tiptoed toward the door, which was cracked ever so slightly, and peeked in. Well, of course, I saw Anna on her hands and knees with some lanky guy I'd never seen before kneeling behind her, screwing her for all he was worth, and was she ever loving it? "Oh God, screw me," she wailed. "Come on, give it to me." The man grunted incoherently. I was looking at them from behind, and they were so wrapped up in what they were doing that they didn't see the door crack open. I gazed in fascination as Anna's breasts swung obscenely under her body. My reaction was strange. Part of me obviously wanted to go in there and break up their party, but another part of me was just numb. I should say here and now that I was not aroused. When you love someone for as long as I loved Anna, the sight of that person cheating on you is not a turn-on if you're wired normally, and I was. I've always been a person who took fidelity seriously. In the space of a heartbeat, the time it took Anna and her boyfriend to come violently, I had an epiphania moment of clarity when my future suddenly spread out before my eyes. I made a decision in that moment that my life was changing for the better. I took out my cell phone, pushed the door open, raised the phone with the camera mode on, and took about 4 really good pictures of the startled lovers. Having gotten visual evidence of my wife's adultery and that of her lover, I turned on my heel and walked briskly out of the house the same way I had entered. I stopped and grabbed a screwdriver on my way out of the garage, then casually used it to poke large holes in 2 of the tires on the Aholy's truck. I know it was childish, but it was the least I could do. Then I got in my sedan and drove off, though not before jotting down the license plate number of the pickup. It was the first day of the rest of my life. As I drove more or less aimlessly, I thought about what I'd just seen and realized that it had been brewing for a long time. I had no idea how long Anna had been cheating on me, whether this guy was the first or just another in a string. It didn't matter because, truthfully, I didn't care. I guess at this point a little background is in order. My name is John Turner, and at the time of this story, I was 40 years old and had been married to Anna for exactly half that time. At one point, we were passionately in love indeed. It was almost love at first sight. We met not long after I graduated from college and started in with a major tech company located in a mid-sized western city. I had been raised in western Nevada, and I had hoped to find something closer to the mountains where I had camped just about every year as a kid. Anna was from the city where we had lived the entirety of our married life. I honestly can't pin down when my marriage turned to shit. It was a very long, very slow decline that wouldn't have been noticeable to an outsider, but it was there, and I could sense it toward the end. We all have dreams, and mine was to live in the mountains and write the great American novel. I think Anna's big dream was simply to land a husband and raise a family there in her hometown. You know how dreams usually go, they fall apart on the rocky shores of reality. The reality for me was that I ended up stuck in this nondescript western burg, writing computer programs for the same company I started with after college. I got to a certain point on the corporate ladder and then got lost as more ambitious men and women passed me by. Part of my problem was I wouldn't cut corners. I was a perfectionist where my work went, and I didn't suffer fools who took the easy way out. Another part of my problem was that I got to be so good at my particular job that I was indispensable in that position. As a result, I got passed over for promotions, although I did get regular raises and occasional bonuses. But the other part of my problem was that I had a fairly passive personality. I was content to go along to get along, and that extended to my marriage. Don't get me wrong, Anna was a nice-looking woman with dark brown hair and an ample figure, and I had always loved her. She never quite lost all of the weight she gained having our 2 children, but I still thought she was sexy, and apparently so did someone else. We bought a house not long after we were married. It was in a decent neighborhood but certainly not the high-rent district. The house was built in the 1970s, and some of the things in the house hadn't been replaced in all that time, so we gradually replaced one appliance after the other with no particular rhyme or reason. We were always fixing this and patching that. We always talked about buying something better, but after refinancing the mortgage as collateral for loans a couple of times, we found we had priced ourselves out of any chance of selling it. In other words, what it would have taken us to pay off the loan and get something better was more than the house was really worth. We could have sold it for less to someone as a fixer-upper, but that still wouldn't have solved the problem of finding someplace better to live that we could afford. Then there was the problem with our children. 3 years into our marriage, we had a son, David. 4 years later came a girl, Rachel. These kids were the poster children for why adults in the animal kingdom sometimes eat their young. I tried to be a disciplinarian as much as I could, but Anna's idea of discipline was to give them whatever they wanted, and she refused to let me spank them for any infraction whatsoever. The consequences were pretty drastic. David was lazy, disrespectful, and slovenly. Rachel was a neurotic nymphomaniac. They learned at an early age how to play Anna and me against each other to get what they wanted, and as a result, we lost control of them by the time they became teenagers. David was about to lose his 6th minimum wage job since barely graduating from high school. It seems employers like for their workers to show up on time and in a reasonably presentable mode of attire. They're funny that way. He was living in a dumpy old house in town with 3 of his slacker buddies, and I was pretty sure he was at the very least smoking pot and drinking a lot. Rachel was about to flunk out of high school altogether because she couldn't keep the MP3 player out of her ears long enough to pay attention to anything in class. She was also dating some scuzzy college guy with tattoos all up and down both arms. Anna was a nurse, and at some point in her career, she decided she liked the night shift. So, on the days that she worked, I'd get home about 5:30, would sometimes have supper, then shed leave for work around 6:15. As a result of our conflicting schedules, we spent less and less time interacting with each other, and our sex life began to dry up. Oh, we'd make time for each other once or twice a month, usually on a weekend afternoon when she was off. It was decent sex. There's no such thing as bad sex, but it was pretty vanilla. We'd get naked, feel each other up for a few minutes, I'd climb on top, we'd hump for about 5 minutes, I'd come, then I'd get her off. Once in a blue moon, Anna would get horny enough to want me to screw her. Still, we got along okay until about 20 months before this incident when she started turning witchy on me. She'd always been a little moody, but I guess when menopause hit, it hit her hard. Soon, she was finding excuses not to have sex, at least not with me. Maybe it was a headache, maybe she was tired, often she went to bed way before I was ready, etc., 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 and she was always finding fault in something I'd done or not done. Looking back on it, the signs were there, I just didn't see them. I'd sometimes call the house during the days when I knew Anna should have been up and around, and I'd get no answer. Sometimes she'd stop in for drinks with some coworkers at some all-night bar that catered to night shift workers. A few times she'd come home on weekends when she'd worked and immediately start a load of laundry like she had something she wanted to wash before I could see it. Everything pointed up to Anna's adultery, but like I said, it really didn't matter. So let's review. I was stuck in a dead-end job in a nowhere town. I was living in a rundown house that was overpriced. My sex life was in the toilet. My witchy wife was cheating on me, and my children were budding delinquents. What would you do? Probably what I did. Actually, the very first thing I did was go to the walk-in clinic to see about my flu. I got a steroid shot and a prescription for an antibiotic. Feeling a little better, I went to Walmart to have my prescription filled and to buy some things I'd need: toiletries, a hot plate, a small pot, some soup, and sodas. Then I drove all the way across town and got me a motel room. I had stopped at the bank on my way to Walmart and gotten out some cash to pay for a place to stay for a couple of days. Once I got settled in, I sat down and wrote out a game plan for the next few days. While I heated a can of soup, I ate as much as I could take, put the rest in the mini refrigerator, crawled in bed, and crashed. It was dark when I awoke, and I was a little disoriented until I remembered where I was and why I was there. I was still weak from the flu and really out of it. 2 days, my illness and the shock of seeing Anna like that to really absorb what had happened. I heated up what was left of the soup, drank a Sprite, and watched a football game on TV, then went back to bed. I did check my cell phone and saw a dozen calls from Anna. I smiled grimly at that. Let her sweat, I thought. I woke up the next morning feeling quite a bit better. The first thing I did was call the office to tell them I wasn't going to be into work. My boss secretary answered the phone, and after I told her why ID called, she told me that Anna had called all afternoon hunting me. She did she? I said. If she calls today, and I imagine she will, just tell her I've called in sick and won't be in today. That'll at least get her off your back. John, where are you? She asked. Let me put it this way and see if you can figure it out, I said. I'm not at my house. Okay. Then I hung up. I had made it very plain, I thought, that I no longer had a home. I had thought a lot about my course of action, and the more I thought about it, the better I liked it. I really couldn't be mad at Anna. I mean, it was pretty obvious that she didn't want to be married to me any longer. For some reason, she wanted something I couldn't give her, whatever that was, and I wasn't going to hold her back from whatever it was that she wanted. She wanted to screw other men? Fine, I'd give her the freedom to do so, and I'd free myself in the process. But I still had some work to do. There were going to be consequences for both Anna and her lover. Nothing terribly drastic, but consequences nonetheless. The first thing I did was call the motor vehicle department to tell them I was interested in buying a pickup truck, but I'd lost the owner's phone number. All I had was the license plate number, plus the make, model, and color of the truck. The friendly woman on the other end of the line cheerfully gave me the man's name and address. My next move was to call a friend of mine who was a lawyer and obtained the name of the best divorce attorney in town. I called that worthy a lady, as it happened, and scheduled an appointment for 1 that afternoon. I showered, then went down to the lobby for a very light breakfast, then went to the bank. I had 2 certificates of deposit that I'd bought a number of years earlier. I cashed those in, withdrew half of the money in our joint savings account, and half of what little there was in the checking account. I put most of the money in a new checking account that I opened in my name only, along with a bank debit card, and still walked out with a little over $6,000 in traveler's checks. I spent the next few minutes calling credit card companies to cancel all but one of my cards and have the accounts put in my name only. I also paid up the balances on each of those cards. The one I generously left for Anna, I didn't bother paying on. Let her worry about that one. Next, I went to a branch of the public library where I bought some computer time. I took the 4 images I'd taken on my cell phone, downloaded them onto an email address I had, and printed out 2 copies of each one. I have to admit they were very clear and explicit. Then I looked up information on the fellow who'd been with my wife the previous afternoon, one Mark Benson. I found out he was married, so I jotted down his wife's name. Then I put a copy of the pictures with a note attached letting her know where I could be reached for more information and put them in an envelope with her name and address on it. I went to the post office, bought some stamps, and mailed it to her. Then it was time for my appointment with Monica Gray, the attorney. I told her what I'd done and what my plans were, and she just nodded her head. When I showed her the pictures, her first question, however, was one of caution. Divorce seems like a pretty drastic step on such short notice, she said. Are you sure you don't want to try to work it out? What's there to work out? I said. My wife has a lover, and I don't want to stand in the way of true love. I have some places I want to go, some things I want to do with my life, and staying here with a cheating wife isn't in those plans. In the end, I agreed to a legal separation for 90 days. The divorce papers were drawn up, and if after 4 months I was still determined to end my marriage, then the papers would be filed and Anna would be served. Now, if you go forward with the divorce, what sort of settlement do you want? Monica asked. I've already taken half of the liquid cash in our bank, I said. She's got a 403b that she's paying into from her work. She can keep that, but she also doesn't get any of my 401k either. She can keep the house, the mortgage is in her name anyway, and I don't want it. If she does sell it, though, I want half of all proceeds from the sale. Okay, Mr. Turner, I guess that about covers it, Monica said. I'll look forward to hearing from you in about 4 months. My last stop was to the office, but not to work. I walked into the Human Resources Department and asked about what would be involved in taking early retirement. I had 24 years in with the company, so I had a good bit of retirement built up. I was told I could begin drawing on my retirement pension when I turned 60, which was 16 years away. I frowned at that but brightened when I asked about cashing in my 401k. Of course, the lady at HR strongly discouraged that because of the hefty tax penalty I'd have to pay. Nevertheless, if I wanted, I could get an immediate cash out of approximately $80,000 if I chose to do so. I thanked the lady and headed back to my motel. I was tired, and after fixing another pot of chicken soup, I went to bed and slept for nearly 7 hours. It was after midnight when I awoke, and I knew I now faced the hardest part of my day, going back to the house and collecting my things. Anna was supposed to be at work, but I wasn't sure if she'd actually gone into work. As it turned out, she hadn't. Anna was asleep when I slipped in quietly, and the house was silent. Apparently, David was so concerned about my whereabouts that he'd gone out, like he always did on Friday night. I wondered if the kids would even miss me when I was gone. Probably not. The first thing I did was get what I needed out of the garage: tools, camping gear, and other assorted useful items. I went into the little office area and got my laptop, plugged it in, downloaded some files from the home PC onto the laptop, then carried it to my vehicle. I had a couple of boxes with me that I loaded with CDs along with a portable player, a lot of books, and some mementos that meant something to me, including a few pictures, though none of Anna. After I loaded that stuff up in my vehicle, I got some suitcases out and walked softly into my former bedroom. I was about halfway finished with packing when I heard a small gasp behind me, then Anna's voice. "John, where have you been?" she said. "I've been worried sick about you." "Have you now?" I said, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. "What are you doing?" Anna said. "What's it look like I'm doing?" I answered sarcastically. "Packing," Anna said in a trembling voice. "Give that girl a gold star for brilliance," I said. "John, I'm so sorry," she started. "Beth, I don't want to hear your excuses or your apologies," I said. "It really doesn't matter why or how or even who, although I do know that much. You want to love someone else, fine, I'm letting you. But I don't love him," she began. "I love you. I don't want him, I want you." "Could have fooled me," I said in an acidic tone of voice. "Sounded to me like you wanted him pretty badly yesterday afternoon." Let me see if I can recall the exact words. "Oh God. Screw me. Isn't that about it?" Anna just buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I looked at her evenly. Whatever brief flash of anger I'd had was gone, replaced by I'm not sure pity. No, not that. Disdain, maybe a little. Disgust, yeah, a bit. But mainly I realized that the biggest thing I was feeling was emptiness. I realized in that moment that I didn't have any feelings for her whatsoever. I just didn't care anymore. I finished packing and let her sob into her pillow. It wasn't until I started out the bedroom door with the suitcases that she jumped off the bed and tried to stop me. "Wait," Anna cried. "Don't leave me, John, please. Can't we work this out? Please, I'm sorry. It wasn't anything. It was just sex." I just stared at her silently as I carefully extricated myself from her clinging arms and walked to the front of the house. Anna followed me, sobbing hysterically. I pointed out the notice of legal separation sitting on the kitchen table among the dirty remnants of that night's pizza dinner. "He'll be back in 4 months, mid-December," I said. "If I'm still thinking then like I am now, I'm following through on a divorce. I will let you know generally where I am, but I'm leaving, and I'm not sure yet where I'm going to be. Goodbye, Anna. They'll see you around." "John, no," Anna cried as I walked out the front door with my suitcases. I didn't look back as I climbed in my vehicle and headed back across town to my motel room. The next day was Saturday, so I slept in. When I got going, I packed up what I had in the motel room and checked out. At $85 a night, the motel was a little steep, and there was a place near my office that catered to visiting business people. They had long-term rates that were considerably cheaper than the average motel. For approximately $45 a night, I rented a clean room for 2 weeks that had a nice little kitchenette, internet cable access, and a large television that had pay-per-view porn movies if I was so inclined. I did sample the sexy wares being offered on the TV, but mostly I kicked back and engorged myself on football all weekend, doing absolutely nothing else. Then I went to work the next Monday morning. The first thing I did was walk into my boss' office and hand him my letter of resignation, effective in 2 weeks. Needless to say, everyone at the office was stunned. I'd been there so long and in the same job that I guess I'd become part of the landscape. My boss, for one, was in a panic. He spent the whole 2 weeks trying to talk me out of retiring, but I was adamant. On Tuesday of the first week, I got a call from my daughter. It was a rather enlightening conversation. "Daddy, why are you leaving us?" Rachel asked. "You'll have to ask your mother that," I replied. "She said to ask you," Rachel said. "Okay," I said. Thursday afternoon, I caught her in bed with some other man. I was sick with the flu, took off work early, and there she was. "I've got the pictures to prove it." "Wow," Rachel said. I didn't think she had it in her. Well, that explains why she's been so weepy. Daddy, she's a basket case. She just sits around crying and cursing herself. You know, she called in sick all 3 days this weekend. Look, tell your mother to get a grip on herself, I said through clenched teeth. If she thinks she can guilt-trip me into coming back to her, she's very mistaken. I've already put in for my retirement, and a week from Saturday, I'm out of here. After that, what she does, what you do, and what your brother does are none of my concern. Well, I love you too, Dad, Rachel cried. Hey, you never gave a flying fuck about me before now. Why should you start now? I said. You're just afraid the gravy train's fixing to roll out of the station. That's not true, Rachel said a little pensively. I need you. You're the only one in this house with any sense, and I don't know what's going to happen without you. Oh, I'm sure you'll manage, I said. Look, Rachel, I'm sorry about what I said. That was mean of me. They'll be in touch, and he'll be home for Christmas. Okay? I love you, really. I know, Daddy, she said with a sniffle. I love you too. David never did call. I had a pretty busy 2 weeks. Anna tried to call any number of times, but after I hung up on her a few times, she got the message that I didn't want to talk to her. Her friends from work tried to get me to at least see her, but I refused and said so in pretty harsh terms. Turns out Mark Benson was a nurse up in the unit where Anna worked, and they'd been screwing around together for about 8 months. Most everyone I talked to said they thought he was the only one Shed stepped out on me with, but they didn't know for sure. I very pointedly told all of them how much I appreciated them telling me what my wife was doing behind my back. They didn't have much to say after that. I got a call in the middle of the first week from Mark Benson's wife, and apparently Anna wasn't the first nurse, married or otherwise, had been able to tap, but Anna was going to be the last, at least while he was her husband, because I had finally given her the solid proof she needed to show him the door. Funny, but I never heard from Mark either about Anna or his ruined tires. I had an awful lot to do before I left my work behind. I had to train someone who could handle my job until they hired a full-time replacement. I had to get my 12-year-old vehicle serviced. I had to scout around for a broker who could set up my 401k in a private account, and I had to get with HR about my severance pay and cashing in my remaining sick time. I spent most of my downtime watching TV, fooling around on my laptop, or shopping for things I would need when I left town. I also visited a few of my friends, all of whom expressed their disbelief that Anna really would cheat on me. All too soon, the second Friday arrived, my last day of work, and with it came a little sense of regret. ID put in 24 years at that company, and ID made a lot of friends there. At lunch that day, my boss called our department together, and we had a little retirement party, and that's when I finally lost my composure. I was trying to give a little thank you speech when I suddenly broke down and cried. The first time ID cried over anything in years. I wept both because I was leaving and because of the circumstances that had driven me to my decision to retire. I had kept myself so busy over the previous 2 weeks that I hadn't given myself a chance to let out the emotions over honest cheating, and seeing my colleagues gathered in my honor was just too much for me to overcome. But I got over it pretty quick, especially when Megan Harris came over to me and invited me to an after-work gathering with a few of them at Chili's. Of course, I said yes, even though I made it clear that I don't drink. Megan was a fellow computer geek, but she was a damn good-looking geek. She was in her early 30s, a tall blonde divorce with a 10-year-old daughter who was spending the weekend with her father. And as she told me that, she gave me a very smoky look. I'll admit that kind of confused me. I mean, I'm not bad-looking. In fact, I look considerably younger than my years, but stud muffin, I'm not. Or at least I didn't think I was. I'm a little shorter than average, about 59. I wear glasses. I have a little bit of a belly, and while I'm no weakling, I'm no fitness freak either. But I was about to find out that I had more sex appeal than ID ever imagined. There was a group of 7, 3 women and 2 men besides Megan and myself, and for once in my life I was the man of the hour. We sat for several hours drinking beer while I had tea and told stories about the plant, about the town, about each other. In the midst of the festivities, we also took time to have dinner. As the night wore on, I was sitting next to Megan, and it became rather obvious that she was coming on to me. She was sitting real close, putting her hand on my thigh or on my arm. I couldn't decide whether she was just doing that because she was drunk or whether she was serious. Finally, about 9, we started drifting our separate ways. I wanted to get an early start the next day and got up to leave. Then I looked over at Megan, and I saw that she really shouldn't drive home, so I offered her a ride. After getting hugs and handshakes, wishing me well, I walked Megan out to my sedan. When we got in, she moved in real close to me, put her hand on my thigh, and gave me a penetrating look. "I'm really not all that drunk," Megan said. "I just wanted you to give me a ride. And not home either." "So, where do you want me to take you?" I said, deliberately playing dumb. "Take me to your motel," she said, and she pulled my face around and kissed me hard and deep. "Megan, you don't have to do this," I said when we broke apart. "I mean, yeah, I'm lonely, but I don't want any sympathy." "Sympathy's got nothing to do with it," she said. "John, I've had the hots for you ever since I started to work there, and I finally got a chance. I'm not passing it up." "You've had the hots for me?" I said. "Come on, Megan, look at me. I'm a fat, gray-haired old man. In the first place, you're not fat. In the second place, your gray hair makes you look sexy. In the third place, you're very good-looking. And in the fourth place, you're one of the nicest men I know. You're one of the few men in that building who's never made a pass at me or any of the other gals, for that matter. Trust me, we've noticed. You've always been a gentleman. I've always been a married gentleman," I said with just a trace of bitterness. "Look, you're going off tomorrow, and you deserve some TLC before you go," Megan said. "Now, are you going to take me back to your motel and screw me or not?" I laughed then and started up my vehicle. Truth is, ID had many a fantasy about Megan Harris, but I always figured she was out of my league, and besides, I was a married man who believed in fidelity. Technically, I guess I was still married, but I was already legally separated, and in my heart, I knew my marriage was over. Megan Harris was offering me her body, and I'd be damned if I was going to pass it up. We were all over each other the moment the door to my room closed, kissing wildly, our hands caressing each other's bodies. In no time at all, I was feasting my eyes on Megan's slender body as she sat back naked on the bed. Her breasts were just about perfect. I was ready to do just that. It had been over a week since I'd let myself come, and then only in my own hands, so I was in need. It was different, however. Megan was a lot more active than Anna had been, at least with me. We held each other as we worked together for our mutual pleasure. I could see on Megan's face that she was building toward another climax. I fell back on the bed and gazed as Megan sat up. Then she carefully, "Thanks," I said. "Anna would never let me do that. She thought it was demeaning." I can see where some women might think that, Megan said. "Personally, I love it." We lay back on the bed and rested. Then I screwed her again, this time a little more leisurely. After that, we fell asleep together. We screwed one final time with the pale light of dawn filtering through the drapes. Then we got up, showered, and dressed. Megan helped me pack. Then I checked out and drove her back to where her car was parked. Before she left, she gave me a very soft kiss. Then she stared into my eyes. "John, all I can say is your wife's an idiot," she said. "She doesn't know what she's thrown away." "Well, I guess sometimes you get used to someone and get in a rut," I said. "I probably let things slide too much from my side. You know how it goes." "Yeah, I guess I do," Megan said. "John, I hope you find what you're looking for. But if you ever decide to come back here for any length of time, look me up. I guarantee I'll treat you a hell of a lot better than Anna did." "Thanks, Megan," I said. "They'll stay in touch. You never know what's going to happen. You take care. Okay?" "You too," she said. "You be careful." And with that, I was off. I put my vehicle on the interstate, headed west, and I didn't look back. I was headed off alone to travel the country with no plans, no itinerary, no agenda. I had some places out west I wanted to see, some things I wanted to do, but I had no particular schedule. I would go wherever my nose led me. It was something I'd wanted to do for years, but had never been able to do. Either I couldn't afford it, I had family concerns, or work concerns. Now I had none of those things holding me back. My first destination, however, was my old hometown. I wanted to spend a few days with my folks, who were starting to get on up in years, and I wanted to see some old friends. I ended up seeing one I hadn't counted on, and it was a delicious experience. My parents were disappointed to hear that Anna and I were splitting up, but my mom also said she wasn't surprised. "She just hasn't seemed very happy the last few times you've been here," Mom said. The following Monday, I was in the supermarket picking up some supplies for my trip when I heard my name being called. I looked around, and a big smile creased my face as I saw a wet dream from my past. It was Linda Roberts, a curvy chick that I went to school with. She was actually a year behind me, but we'd always seemed to have a class or two together every year, and we got to be friendly. At the time, Linda was a hot number who was a little too fast for me, but time had slowed her down a little bit. She had learned the hard way that the fast life wasn't always the good life. But time had still been generous to her because she was still a stone beauty. If anything, age had made her better looking than when she was in high school, softening her features and adding a little padding in strategic places. She was a little shorter than average, with thick dark hair and expressive brown eyes. Of course, her figure was too sexy. She had moved back to town after divorcing her second husband and was an assistant manager at the store. She lived alone in a small house in a quiet neighborhood not far from her daughter's family. We chatted for a few minutes, getting caught up with our lives. When I told her I was divorcing my wife, her eyes lit up. "I'm off tomorrow," she said in an inviting tone of voice. "How would you like to have dinner with me?" "I'd love to," I said. "Any place in particular?" "How about my place?" she said. "It's been a while since I fixed dinner for a man, especially an old friend like you." I arrived at Linda's place about 7 the next night to find her dressed in a tight red dress with spaghetti straps and her face quite tastefully made up. My younger brother, who lives nearby, had given me a Viagra pill when I told him who I was seeing. He said I was going to need it, and it looked like he was right. I entered her small but tidy little house and was assaulted by the aroma of enchiladas cooking in the oven and other assorted Mexican treats being prepared for dinner. I was about to discover that Linda was a terrific cook, but I also learned that she was a skilled conversationalist. While waiting for dinner to finish cooking, we sat in her living room real close and got caught up with each other's lives. She was very understanding about what had happened to me, but also about what had happened to Anna. Linda had wrecked her first marriage by cheating, but her second marriage had fallen apart because her husband was cheating. So she was able to give me some insights from both sides of the fence. It didn't make me feel any better about it, but it did help. Dinner was something special: enchiladas, tostados, rice, and the best flan I've ever tasted in my life. "How do you stay as slim as you do when you cook like this?" I asked as I pushed my bloated belly away from the table. "Oh, I only cook like this on special occasions," Linda said with a laugh. "If I ate like this every day, I'd be as wide as I am tall." We retired to the front room then and sat real close on the couch again. We talked for a bit, getting around to why Shed invited me over that night. "Because I wanted to do something I never got a chance to do when we were in high school," she said. "You were always so nice, so cute, so sexy, but I knew I could never have you then. Mama and Papa wouldn't have approved of me dating an Anglo, you know. It's very ironic, very sad. They had no problem with me screwing around with all these cholos, these gangbangers, as long as they were Mexican. But a nice white boy? Forget it. But you don't have that problem now, do you?" I said as I brought my face real close to hers. We kissed then, and I lost myself in her full lips and active tongue. Linda was acting like a hungry woman, a woman who hadn't had any in a while, which amused me. She got a little teary when I asked her how long it had been since Shed had a man. "Too long," she said. "When I came back here, I made a vow that I wasn't going to let my past trip me into stupid relationships. But memories die hard in a small town. If I had 5 for every time I've been propositioned in the past year by somebody I went to school with, I wouldn't have to work. That's why this is so special for me. You never looked down on me back in the old days, and you'd have never made an improper advance if I hadn't invited you here. I know you. You wouldn't. Doesn't mean I wouldn't have thought it," I said with a chuckle. "Believe me, Linda, I shot a lot of comeback in high school imagining myself screwing you." For some reason, that just melted her because she whispered something in Spanish, and then she was all over me, kissing me deeply and working her hands over my body. She quickly got my sweater off and the t-shirt I had under it, then attacked my pants. In less time than it takes to write this, I was naked on her sofa, and Linda was standing in front of me, unzipping her dress. It fell to the floor, and I know I stared in utter reverence. It was dark like the hair on her head, and it spread from her abdomen all the way to her bum. The whole effect was enhanced by the garter belt and hose she was wearing and the heels she still had on. I reached up and fondled the hanging globes. "Fuck me," Linda whispered frantically. "I want you," and I wasn't going to argue because I wanted her there too. Hearing that kind of praise from a woman like Linda on top of the experience with Megan was a real boost to my ego, reaffirming that I had plenty of gas left in my tank, no matter what Anna might have thought. Linda kissed me wildly then and whispered in my ear that she wanted me to screw her. Never let it be said that I don't give a hot woman what she wants. When I was satisfied, I lifted myself up as I did. Then I collapsed onto her back and gave a laugh of utter contentment. That moment was the first time I thought about thanking Mark Benson for setting the events in motion that had led me to that point. Thanks to Mark and his tawdry affair with my wife, I was free of my comfortable but boring life in a nowhere town. I was free of an increasingly loveless marriage and a chaotic family life in a decaying house. I was free of a job that had long since ceased to challenge me in a large corporation where I was lost in the shuffle. I was free to go anywhere, do anything, and screw anyone I wanted, and I couldn't have done that with a clear conscience had I not caught my wife and her lover in the act of adultery. After catching our breath, Linda and I retired to her oversized bathtub, one of the few extravagances Shed indulged herself in since returning to town, where we spent a long time bathing each other in between kissing. We ended up screwing again right there in the bathtub, then retired to her bed and screwed again before we finally passed out from well-sated exhaustion. I spent the next day visiting with my family, then I set out in earnest the following day. As I drove, I reflected that it had been exactly 3 weeks since ID caught Anna and Mark. 3 weeks that had completely changed my life. This trip was the first step in living my new life. Over the next 4 months, I wandered the western half of the country, seeing places I had only read about. My first stop was Mt. Rushmore, then I spent a couple of days exploring the site of the Battle of Little Bighorn. I walked the grounds and communed with the ghosts of Custer and the 7th Cavalry, and with those of Crazy Horse and his warriors. After that, I drove to Jackson Hole and camped out for a week and a half while I toured Yellowstone and the Grand Tetons. I had to laugh when I got my first look at the Tetons, thinking that the Frenchies who named them must have been awfully hard up to see women's tits in those jagged peaks. From there, I drove up to spend some time in northern Idaho, camping on the banks of Lake Pend Oreille. I had been there once before when I was a teenager at a Boy Scout jamboree in 1969. In fact, my fellow scouts and I were among the few Americans who didn't see the first moon landing because we were camped well away from televisions. While I was there, I fished the lake and hiked the trails, enjoying the cool mountains of the northern Rockies. When I awoke one morning in late October to 3 inches of snow on the ground, however, I knew it was time to move on to more temperate climes. I went to Seattle, then down the Pacific coast through Oregon to spend some time in the Napa Valley. And yes, I did sample some of the excellent wine that the area produces before going to Yosemite for several days. After that, I visited an aging aunt and uncle in the San Francisco area, and he helped me achieve a long-held desire to see Southern Cal play UCLA in the Rose Bowl, one of the truly big rivalries in college football at one of the most historic stadiums in the country. I also took a day to spend at the beach in Venice, getting an eyeful of all the California hardbodies that hang out there wearing very little. I was in a gift shop across the street from the beach when I saw a postcard and got the wicked idea of sending one to my wife and her lover. It showed 4 very nubile, very scantily clad babes together with the heading that read, "Greetings from Venice Beach." I wrote a note on each one, thanking them for screwing around on me so I could take this trip. Then I sent one to the house for Anna and one to the hospital for Mark. That was the weekend before Thanksgiving, and it was time for me to get to where I really wanted to go. My best friend from high school lived in Henderson, Nevada, a beautiful mountain town not far from the Four Corners. He and his wife had started a small business, and they needed someone to help with computer marketing and other cyber arts. It was perfect for me. He owned a small house that had been using as a rental property where I could stay, and he offered a flexible work schedule that would allow me the freedom to go wherever I wanted whenever I wanted. I had spent a lot of spare time on the road doing a lot of writing, and I had the makings of a pretty good book. I simply wrote about myself and my trip and why I was doing it, along with other pertinent reflections. Once I completed my business with Anna and settled in Nevada, I'd have time to polish my work. It was all about the changes in a middle-aged life as a result of one disastrous event. I didn't know it that Monday when I headed east toward Nevada, but my life was about to change again in a completely unexpected way. I had been in Henderson a couple of days when Sophia, my friend Ryan's wife, announced that she had invited a friend of hers over to share Thanksgiving dinner with us. This woman lived alone, Sophia said, and didn't socialize much, but Sophia hated the thought of someone being alone on Thanksgiving, so she had extended the invitation, and it had been accepted. Funny how life pivots on little decisions like that. Maybe I would have met Elaine O'Brien anyway once I moved to Henderson, but who knows what might have happened in the interim. Perhaps Shed have decided to move on, or maybe someone else would have swooped in and knocked her off her feet. I don't know. All I do know is that when Elaine walked through the door of Ryan and Sophia's house, my stomach did a shimmy, and before the day was out, I was determined that I was going to make her mine. I saw a woman in her mid-30s who was quite tall at nearly 6 feet and slender but not bony. She had a pale complexion peppered with freckles, flaming red hair cut very short, and soft green eyes that were an enchanting blend of mischief and sadness. When she opened her mouth to speak, it sounded like a symphony of leprechauns. Yes, she was a full-blooded native of Ireland who had come to the States with an Irish dance troupe, one of those river dance groups, and had settled in Denver. She had moved to Henderson about a year earlier after breaking off an engagement to be married 2 days before the wedding. Seems she had caught her groomtobe at his bachelor party in the act of screwing a stripper who had been hired for the night. She hadn't intended on crashing his party, but she and a couple of her girlfriends had been on their way to breakfast after their hen party when she happened to pass a strip club and saw her fiancé and his group coming out. One of the girls from the club was wrapped around her betrothed, and she had decided to follow them to see what happened. It had been an emotionally scarring event, one more blow in a life that had seen plenty of them. Her father had been an alcoholic who beat her mother until they fled him when Elaine was 15 after Head started beating on her. Even then, she said, her father stalked them relentlessly until the police finally stepped in, and he was charged and convicted of spousal abuse. She'd subsequently been assaulted when she was on holiday in London when she was 22, and She'd had her heart broken several times after that, culminating in her fiancé's cheating. I think the reason we hit it off so well was because we understood what cheating was all about. Over the previous weeks of traveling, I had thought a lot about Anna and what she'd done, and I couldn't get past the inconsistency of her protestations of love for me with the image of her in bed with another man. She had cheated me and our marriage, and I didn't have a clue as to why. I had been telling myself all along that I didn't care, but that wasn't entirely true. I did care. I wanted to know what had happened to the love we'd once shared, why Anna had felt she was entitled to take a lover on the side, knowing how I felt about fidelity. I did keep up with what was going on back home, mostly through emails to and from Rachel, who seemed to have decided at this late date to repair our relationship. She was plainly worried about David, who had indeed lost his job and was begging Anna to let him move back in. I spoke to Anna a couple of times briefly, but whenever she started to get weepy or tried to apologize, I cut her off. I did promise her that I would sit down and listen to her when I got back. It wasn't going to change anything, but I wanted to hear what she had to say. Nothing was going to change my mind. By then, I had made my decision on what I wanted, and I wanted to live in Henderson. As a result, I spent 3 weeks getting settled in my new home and helping Ryan and Sophia with their business, and I was spending a lot of time with Elaine. We talked long and deep Thanksgiving night about everything, to Sophia's amazement and delight, and when I walked with her out to her car, we sort of looked at each other, and we kissed. There wasn't a lot of passion in it, but there was a lot of promise. Over the 3 weeks I was there before I returned home, or rather, my soon-to-be former home, we dated probably a dozen times, and we got more and more intimate. I knew I had to be careful because of Elaine's past. She had been hurt badly by men, and she was wary of being hurt again. But the more I got to know her, the more I realized that despite her history, she was a woman with a hot-blooded nature. She was a dynamite kisser with lips that were just full enough to enjoy and a tongue that knew what it was doing. Waiting was excruciating because the more time I spent with Elaine, the more I wanted her. She was so sexy, so sensual, and yes, so needy. But I understood her need to be cautious, and I respected her desire to take it slow. My patience was rewarded. The weekend before I was scheduled to head back to finish my business with Anna, Ryan and Sophia wanted me to get a real taste of Nevada, so they planned a 4-day ski trip. There's a nice ski resort right outside Henderson, and Purgatory is real close, but they wanted me to enjoy the whole ski experience. So they pulled some strings with a friend of theirs in the real estate business who helped us get a nice 2-bedroom condo at Lake Tahoe, about 70 miles away. I was having dinner with Elaine one night, a few days before we were to leave, when the subject of the trip came up and she asked what she should bring. I just kind of stared at her, and she gave me a Mona Rachel smile. "You knew I was going, didn't you?" she said. "I was hoping, but I didn't know if it was my place to invite you or not," I said. "You know the condo only has 2 bedrooms. And that's a problem, how?" she said, smiling a little wider. "Are you sure?" I said, taking her hands and looking deep into her eyes. "Very sure," she said. "I knew you were the one I've been looking for all my life the first time I met you. I know you know your heart. You're a good man, John, and you deserve to be happy." Did she ever? We drove up to Lake Tahoe on a cold, clear Thursday morning. The early winter snows had been heavy in the high country, so we figured the skiing would be good. And it was. I had been skiing once before, a long time before, when a group of us from college spent a week at Aspen. Elaine had been once before, the previous season, with Ryan and Sophia. Despite that limited experience, Elaine and I took the Oneida ski school that was recommended before we tackled the slopes on our own. Once we'd been taught the basics, she and I had a blast going up and down the mountain. We prudently stayed away from the black slopes, the expert trails, but we did try a few of the blue trails, the intermediate slopes, and found we could handle them with a fair bit of skill. It was bracing to spend time out on the mountain with a woman I grew to care about quite intensely. I wasn't sure yet if I was in love or if she was in love with me, but we liked each other a lot, and we were comfortable in each other's company. We ended that first day sore and tired, but it was a good kind of soreness and a pleasant tiredness that comes from having a lot of fun. The four of us ended up at a nice, modestly priced restaurant for our post-ski dinner, and we toasted our rapidly cementing partnership in every sense of the word. When we got back to the condo, I showered, then sat back on the large waterbed with a book I'd been reading while Elaine took a long bath. I was toying with the idea of joining her but decided not to be pushy. I wanted her to make the first move. I'm glad I did. She came into the bedroom smelling like peach blossoms, clad in a long, moderately heavy robe. She stood just inside the door and smiled at me. Slowly, she undid the sash of the robe and let the sides fall open. "See anything you like?" she said, her soft Irish brogue sounding ever so sexy. I just nodded as I feasted my eyes on Elaine's tall, trim body. My God. She had a flat stomach, legs that seemed to go forever, beautiful little tits on her chest, and a thick. I rolled off the bed and walked up to her, letting my hands softly caress her body as we came together and kissed slowly, with a smoldering passion that was steadily mounting. It was like we were in a dream world as I softly slid my hands over her body while she pulled my t-shirt off and lowered my pants. We walked to the bed then and lay back, our bodies sliding together like magnets. Our hands quickly found each other's. Unlike my two previous encounters with Megan and Linda, I didn't feel the urgency, the need to get on with business. We sensed instead that we had all the time in the world to explore each other, to love each other. We kissed again, and this time when we broke apart, Elaine gently pushed me on my back, then started kissing and licking her way down my neck to my chest. Eventually, it was so slow, so sensual, so erotic, the way she used her lips to apply just the right amount of pressure to drive me utterly wild, the way she used her tongue to excite every nerve ending I had down there. I wanted to love this woman completely. We kissed again, this time with more passion. Then I rolled her onto her back. As long as I live, I'll never forget my first sight of Elaine O'Brien waiting expectantly for sex. She lay back on that bed, her eyes misty with lust. "Oh," she panted softly as I started screwing her at a deliberate pace. I wanted to get there together, and as our mouths met in a furious lip lock, we were clutching at each other, kissing each other wildly as we spent our passion on each other. It seemed like I was never going to stop, but eventually, I did, and it seemed like we gave a collective sigh as we slumped together in happy exhaustion. Elaine and I laughed softly, contentedly, as we slowly drifted down from the orgasmic clouds. We held each other and slowly drifted off to sleep, spending the first of what I hoped would be thousands of nights together. The whole trip went like that. We tried just about every non-black slope on the mountain, toured the shops and cafes of downtown Lake Tahoe, and made love every night after we got back to the condo. By the time we got back to Henderson, we knew it was love. On the Tuesday before Christmas, I packed my SUV with a few suitcases and presents for one and all, then headed back east for a few weeks. I went by way of my folks' house but didn't linger. I did visit Linda to give her a present, but I didn't screw her. I told her I'd found someone in Nevada that I wanted to commit myself to, and she smiled as she said she understood. "I'd have expected nothing less from you," she said. Megan Harris was much the same way when I got back to town and called her up for dinner. "I knew it wouldn't take long for someone to find you," she said. "You're too good a man to stay single very long. I'm glad you're happy." I did not stay at the house when I went back. It wasn't home anymore, and I didn't want to give Anna any illusions. I did visit quite a bit, and it was cordial enough, but she and I avoided the elephant in the room until after Christmas. It actually wasn't a bad Christmas. David had convinced Anna to let him move back home, but she finally grew a backbone where he was concerned. He could stay, but he had to pull his weight around the house. had come dangerously close to some serious drug trouble when he was living with his buddies, and apparently it had scared some sense into him because he was talking seriously about entering a rehab program. Rachel had really taken my departure as a real warning shot. She ditched the scuzzy boyfriend and was taking more interest in school, figuring out, as I had told her repeatedly in our email exchanges, that without at least a high school diploma, her odds of getting anywhere in life were about nil. She had gotten a part-time job at a youth-oriented novelty shop in the mall, where her quirky dress and hipster attitude were put to good use. That left Anna. The day after Christmas, Rachel was at work, and I gave David $70 and told him to go have fun at the mall. Anna and I had serious business to discuss, and we needed to be alone. I brought the divorce petition that I'd gotten from Monica Gray and set it on the coffee table in the front room. Anna just stared at it with sad eyes brimming with tears. "I guess you've made your decision," she said. "I have," I replied. "But I think I deserve some answers first. Why did you cheat on me, Anna? I know we had problems in our marriage, but if you'd been open about it, we might have worked through those problems. I don't know. I guess I expected you to fight for me, fight for our marriage. That if there was a competitor for my affections, that you'd do what you had to do. It just went too far. I was drinking a lot during that time, but that's no excuse. I let it happen, thinking that I could, I don't know, have this little fling, get that itch out of my system. I really didn't think you'd give up on us that easily. Anna, what was there to fight for?" I said softly. "You were witching all the time. David was one step away from jail. Rachel was a teenage mother waiting to happen. The house was a wreck. Work was boring. And then you started cheating on me. Honestly, what was there to fight for? And that still doesn't answer the question of why you decided to screw another man behind my back and then keep on screwing him for 8 months. That's something I just can't get my mind around." "A new experience," Anna said. "It was a jolt of excitement in a boring life. I guess I just needed something more. But John, you have to believe me. I've never stopped loving you. You were always the #1 man in my life, and you always will be." "I don't doubt that," I said, "although I'm having some trouble believing you loved me when you were entertaining Mark, especially when you were finding excuses not to have sex with me. I may have been the #1 man in your life, like you say, but you were still paying a lot of attention to #2. I'm so sorry about all of that," she said in a very small voice. "I guess I lost track of what was really important. So, do you hate me then?" "No, of course not," I said. "We had 24 years together, and a lot of them were good years. You're the mother of my children, bless their hearts, and I think, in the main, you're a decent person who got confused and made a costly mistake. No, I don't hate you, Anna, but I don't love you anymore. That died the day I walked in on you and your lover. Maybe we just drifted apart, and Mark saw an opening. Actually, I owe you my thanks. What you did provided the spark that allowed me to have a new life doing things I always wanted to do in places I always wanted to be." "Well, it certainly agrees with you," she said finally. "You look great. You do deserve to be happy, I guess. And I guess I deserve to be miserable, don't I?" she said as I watched Anna finally lose her composure. I didn't want to, but I went to her then and held her one last time, letting her cry. After she got calmed down, she signed the divorce agreement, and since we were in a no-fault state, and we were divorcing on the nebulous grounds of irreconcilable differences, it would be final after 75 days. I stayed a couple more days to pack up the rest of my things and to visit with the kids. I was still worried about David, but it looked like Rachel was going to be all right. She had found her little niche in retail sales, and she seemed to have gained a newfound respect for me. On the next to last day of the year, I said my final goodbyes and headed off to settle in Henderson for good. That was 3 years ago. Ryan's business started to take off in that time, and I found the variety of tasks I was asked to perform to be quite stimulating. I spent a lot of time polishing up my book, and when I had what I believed was a finished product, I started shopping it around to publishers. Falling Up got some nice reviews and managed to make the lower end of some bestseller lists. It's on its 3rd printing and still sells modestly. I'm working on a 2nd book, a novel about Custer, and I have a computer full of odds and ends, essays and ramblings that I may or may not ever get published. Doesn't matter. I'm expressing my creative side in a way I never did before. Elaine and I fell deeper in love, and 8 months after we met, we were married in a small ceremony there in Henderson. Rachel came out for the wedding, and she and Elaine became friendly. Rachel was promoted to manager of the store where she'd been working and seems to be doing well. A year ago, I was blessed with another child, as Elaine delivered a baby boy. You cannot fathom how much I appreciate a second chance at fatherhood. Anna hasn't remarried, although she does date some. She's filled her life with working on seriously fixing up the house, which gives her something to occupy her time when she's not working. We've stayed friends, and we still talk occasionally, mostly about what to do with David. His commitment to sobriety didn't take, and he fell deeper into the spell of drugs. He's currently incarcerated after being convicted of manufacturing meth for sale with his old roomies. Our relationship blows hot and cold, but at least we have one. There are those who say adultery is a devastating thing, that it destroys lives, and I guess in one sense that may be true. It certainly destroyed my old life, but out of the bitter ashes of that cheating came a new, far better life for me. I'm living the life I always dreamed about when I was growing up, in a place where I always wanted to be. That would not have happened had I stayed married to Anna. She did me a favor when she started cheating on me, and as a result, I was liberated to follow my own path. The best revenge is living well, and I'm living a pretty damn good life because of my ex-wife and her lover. Thanks, guys. I needed that. Thanks for watching. Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the best changes. What would you do in his situation? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.